At the end of a field trip for herb school, I was reluctantly packing my camp into my truck. I did not want to leave the forests of northern Minnesota and drive hundreds of miles south to the edge of the prairie, a place I live and work and cannot feel at home because there is so little water. My teacher came to me as I was plotting my escape to Duluth and asked me to write about our time spent in the woods. I understood that she wanted me to share my experience of the trip because the majority of the school did not participate. I was certainly happy to write about what was a beautiful and enriching educational experience, yet was troubled by the origins of the assignment. I was one of 2 students who made it to class, and now I have the responsibility of catching everyone else up. Spending time and energy on such an undertaking felt to me like regression. However, I trusted my teacher's judgment. I suppose there was a learning opportunity in fulfilling such a task. We have been informed of the mandatory field trip 8 months in advance, which seems like a reasonable amount of time to prepare. A few students had stated they would be unable to attend, but a few days before our departure, we were counting on approximately 10 people to show up. Perpetually late, I left a day early. I set up the kitchen tent and dug a fire pit. The next evening, at the agreed-upon time, my teacher and I sat alone around the flames. Kayla is in her early 60s. She has thick gray hair and the skin of a woman who has lived with open arms on the edge of the prairie for centuries. Deep, taut wrinkles carved by the southwest winds, freckles painted by a persistent, shadeless sun. Her eyes are dark pools of brown that project an inner twinkle I am simultaneously afraid of and intrigued by. She has a hump in her back, yet she stands up perfectly straight. Not in a proud shape, instead like she was born that way and the hump is an appendage rather than a burden. Kayla has the biggest voice I have ever experienced. You don't just hear it, you are shaken by it. She walked a few paces away, looked out over the meadow and to the trees beyond. A sound came from her that was like a whale mourning the discovery of her dead calf. I will hear, see, and feel that sound for as long as I live. When it was over, my teacher sobbed briefly, said she didn't understand, and went about setting up her tent. I felt like Ham. There is a story about him and all his descendants being cursed by God after Ham walked in on his father during a vulnerable state. I was cursed on that day. The heart becomes heavy with grief, and you carry on with the weight of having been exposed to incomprehensible loss. When you see the raw, fresh pain of someone powerful, you become changed. I sat at my desk a week later to write about the trip, and I struggled. What did I want to tell my classmates? What did they miss in their absence? I imagined the conversations that would take place about Minnesota, inevitably beginning with why each person didn't participate. In my essay, before hearing about how life happens, I wanted to show via story that everyone goes through shit and we persevere regardless. I like to think we make each other stronger in this way, offering stories of facing and working through adversity. Life is always happening, and the point is to live in engagement to the happenings. To be alive is to be in relation and proactivity with life. I wanted to express what to me felt like a culmination as opposed to an isolated incident. Life is not a series of events strung together by time. It is a constant process influenced by outside forces, i.e., a composition of response to stimulus. I had gone on the same field trip the previous year during my first year of study with Kayla. As far as school goes, the first trip was like a pop quiz. I had no idea what to expect. The same trip the following year was like an exam. I prepared extensively, applying my studies after diligent work. What is learning if not overcoming a challenge? There was a void, a tangible presence of so many students' lack of participation. It cast a shadow on us. I was curious. I wanted to interact with the black hole we could identify and not describe. I got sucked in. Maybe I'm still there, reporting from the inside. The trip was incredible and empowering. My hard work paid off so much more than I could have dreamed. And still, my educational experience got clouded by what I feel to be an ambiguous distinction between people's personal lives and that circumstances' effect on professional endeavors, such as school. It is uncomfortable to be in class with people not participating. It creates a power dynamic between the people who are present and engaged and people who are absent and or disengaged. It is worth noting here that the lack of participation was not due to socioeconomic situations. Interestingly, these 2 students who made it to Minnesota have the lowest income levels of everyone in the school. My theory as to the significant amount of students who didn't participate is that there was a lack of organization, both on the part of the school and on individual students. This inability to organize is concerning to me. What is or isn't happening in the structure of our school, in the structure of our lives, to make this a reality? Is the learning modality in and of itself inaccessible? I was inspired to sift through it all. How did we get to this place of confusion and disarray? A place of entanglement. I want to see and touch and untie every tangle. I want to weave a smooth web. I want to illuminate the larger context and invite others to share their knowledge and experience in contribution to clarity. I reflect regularly on what it means to be an herbalist, a student of plant medicine, a healer, a biologist, a student of life. I've integrated the wise woman tradition into my mental paradigms while deconstructing the ways in which I was socialized. I think about what it means to be an apprentice of Kayla's. What it feels like is the 2 years I spent studying under her were 2 years I spent dedicating my life to her and everything she had to teach me. Dictionary.com defines an apprentice as 1, a person who works for another in order to learn a trade. 2, historical, a person legally bound through indenture to a master craftsman in order to learn a trade. That's what herb school at Prairie Wise was to me. I tried to convey the sentimentality in the essay that I gave Kayla shortly after our return from Minnesota. I wrote 8 pages in a few days, in between being a full-time student at 2 schools and a full-time employee at the local health food store, on what I had to go through to enjoy the field trip. I talked about my experience on the trip the previous year and romanticized being devoted to the wise woman tradition, how rewarding of an education and healing modality it is. I was hoping what I wrote would promote conversations on the culture of Western herbalism, where we have been and where we are going in these very strange new times for our craft. Perhaps I missed the mark, as I received very little feedback on the essay. Kayla told me it was inflammatory. What did I learn during my writing? Did I fulfill the task of catching anyone up? I can't say that I have answers to these questions. I want to dissect the structure of my school and of other Western herb schools and the history of herbal education in order to more precisely put into context where we are. Do we want to work within this system? If so, how? Something that I think perhaps enables ambiguity is a disconnect between actualizing what it means to sign up for, commit to, and fulfill an apprenticeship and what it means to be a student in 21st century America. For most of us, Examples of what school is consists of formal education standardized by the government. Incidentally, modern medical education was largely funded by barons Rockefeller and Carnegie and explicitly excluded women from attendance and practice in the field. We are familiar in American public school with a grade scale and encouraged to be non-confrontational pupils. Herbal medical education, yet standardized, and until recently forced underground, is fluid, ever-changing, in sync with the seasons and the waxing and waning of the moon, impacted by rain and drought. On the first day of class, my first year with Kayla, she announced to an all-female student body that she invites people to speak up if they disagree with anything she says, that we will all learn from that kind of diversity of understanding. During my time at Prairie Wise, there were no grades, no homework assignments, no reviews of the suggested reading, no progress reports, just one written test that took me a collective 12 hours to complete. I half-jokingly started telling Kayla that she needs to teach people how to go to her school. She creates a learning environment that is unconventional and oftentimes a totally foreign experience to her students. Simultaneously, it is a learning environment that seems to be a completely natural progression of the wise woman tradition and its place between Europe and North America. She honors all the women who came before her. She honors the plants and her teachers, and she strives to honor her students. I look around and see the changes happening, and I feel utterly blessed to study under her because I fear the old way, the way of the brilliant lay healers, is almost entirely extinct. I want to fiercely preserve what I can, but one day the polar bear will be a skeleton instead of a living creature. I want to acknowledge the why of the why. I want to have a moment of silence for all the millions of European herbalists, the foremothers of our current study as North American herbalists, who were burned alive for centuries because of their knowledge and practice of plant medicine. I want to have a moment of silence for the fact that midwifery is still illegal in large parts of this country. I want to sit down and be quiet about the one abortion clinic in the state of Missouri that was open and in operation before the dumbass motherfucking heartbeat law got passed. Life does not just happen. More accurately, the patriarchy strikes again. I wonder how this may victimize us in our ability to organize ourselves and each other. How do we interact and react to these outside forces? What is our response to this stimulus? In between the moments of silence, the deep breaths, and the next step forward, I want to talk about how we can survive and flourish during a transitional period of herbalism from the underground to the inevitable standardization of clinical education and practice. What will it look like now that we don't have to hide anymore? What have we inherited, and what will we do as a profession with our inheritance? How can we support each other during this groundbreaking time? What role does the internet and social networking websites play in our ability to communicate with one another, with our ability or inability to organize? What kind of standards will we hold ourselves to? Do we dive in and assimilate to a mirror of the world that burned our predecessors alive? How can we support one another's ascension and avoid and heal from being conquered by divisiveness? Is power consolidated in the new world?